NBA Insider grades up for the Nerlens Noel trade. Everybody seems to be giving it bad reviews, but is there an optimistic view in this one? Kevin Pelton joins us now on the Sports Bash 97.3 ESPN. So a lot of people here really giving it to Colangelo. He's like public enemy number one, it seems like. So how did Colangelo do in the Nerlens Noel deal, Kevin?
Well, I think a lot of people, Sixers fans, are looking at it just in terms of the level of players involved. And, the thing I put out yesterday on Twitter is you don't really trade for players, you trade for contracts. The reason guys have value in trade is because of the fact that they produce more than their contract and they're going to get paid. And that's the case with Noel the rest of the season while he's still on his rookie contract. But as soon as he goes into restricted free agency this summer, that mostly goes away. I mean, we're talking about probably $15 to $20 million as a starting salary for him on his next deal. And, I think that makes sense for the Mavericks because of the fact that he's going to be their starting center, and also they don't have a lot of cap space. They can take advantage of that relatively small cap hold he has and go over the cap to re-sign him. For the Sixers, you're talking about a choice between Nerlens Noel and whoever else you can sign with that $15 to $20 million, along with also getting Justin Anderson for that money.
So they end up making the deal now. If you're a Sixers fan, are you looking at it like we've had these people, that call in and say, look, why didn't they just match any, deal and then try to trade him while he's under contract to a team that might be more desperate to get him?
I don't see who would be desperate to get him at this point. I mean, that's part of the issue here that we have to talk about is, look, there just isn't that kind of market for centers right now. Most teams have good starting centers. A lot of teams have multiple good centers, like the Sixers did with Embiid and Noel before they made this deal. And there's just not a lot of desperation out there. And again, once he's fairly paid, you're not going to be willing to give up a lot to go get someone, for the same price that you could have gotten them as a free agent.
Kevin Pelton, ESPN.com with us here. Tell us a little bit about Justin Anderson. What do you know about him? Because he seems to be the key to the deal if you're the Sixers, because the two picks aren't helping you. I mean, not to say that they don't value the second-round picks, but you don't trade Nerlens Noel for 2 second-round picks, right?
No, without question. I mean, I think if they would have phrased this all along is, the Sixers are trading Noel for Justin Anderson instead of this idea that it was Anderson and a first-round pick, and then, the surprise finding out the protection and that they're very unlikely to ever see that first-round pick. I think it would have seemed a lot better because, Anderson's a guy who was drafted in the first round a couple of years ago, and he's more or less performed at that level when he's gotten a chance. I mean, I think he was a poor fit for Dallas because, he's not necessarily always a good decision maker or a disciplined player, which is what Rick Carlisle really wanted on the wing. But, he can be an effective freelancer. He's got a good combination of block and steal rates. Him and Noel are 2 of the 21 guys in the league who both are at 2.0% or better in terms of their block and steal rate, which Anderson is just barely there, not as high as Noel, and did a nice job for the Mavericks last year against Kevin Durant in the playoffs. But I think, he's the kind of guy that if he can develop his three-point shooting, which is always the question for wings like this, he's the kind of role player the Sixers continue to need on the perimeter. Yeah,
this seems like a kind of deal, Kevin, where the Sixers had the mindset of, look, we're not going to bring back Noel at that price tag. We've got to start finding some positional balance to build around Ben Simmons and Embiid, and maybe this guy's offense isn't there, but it appears that they value the defense that he brings, and because Embiid and Simmons will dominate the ball so much.
Yeah, you're not going to want a lot of shot creators. I mean, you're going to want 3-and-D guys around those players, and you already have one of those certainly in Robert Covington. But, the more of them you can get, the better. I mean, they hope that TLC develops into that kind of player, but Anderson just gives you another opportunity at that.
Also, keep in mind, and Kevin, the Sixers, they kind of pushed for Anderson too, right? Like he was a big part of that deal for them, almost a deal breaker, it seems like.
If Dallas wasn't going to give up this year's first-round pick unprotected, then for sure I'd imagine he had to be in the deal.
We're talking with Kevin Pelton a little bit. The night before the trade deadline, Kevin, Sixers make a deal with Ersan Ilyasova.
In the books, Nerlens Noel is in.
I think it made sense for both teams. Ilyasova served his purpose in terms of helping space the floor this season, but as you look towards potentially re-signing him as a free agent, I don't know if it made a ton of sense with Ben Simmons, at power forward going forward, and then Dario Saric proving that he can, fill a relatively similar role to Ilyasova, and I think his development over the course of the season helped make that possible.
You talked about Nerlens Noel and the value he had. What does it say about Jahlil Okafor and his value that he's still on the Sixers roster today?
I mean, clearly they wanted to trade him first, and it says that they couldn't get the kind of interest that they wanted because, again, that center market is so flooded. So, reportedly, by all accounts, they were close to a deal with the Portland Trail Blazers, but the Blazers decided to go with Yusuf Nurkic instead. And at that point, that kind of, when the Pelicans then got DeMarcus Cousins, that shrunk the pool of interested suitors pretty considerably.
Yeah, so are they in a position to be able to move Okafor any better in the offseason? Is there a better time to try to move him?
Probably not. I mean, there will be more teams that will be looking for centers in the offseason, but then, you also have a lot of free agents out there, guys like Dwayne Dedmon and Willie Reed, who have established themselves as pretty solid backup centers who were on, below market contracts last summer, got below market contracts last summer, are probably going to get bigger raises. And I think a lot of teams would prioritize guys like that who are easier to fit in than Jahlil Okafor.
That Dwayne Dedmon, he played in Philly for a little while there, and he was one of the revolving process guys who has made a home in the NBA. We're talking with Kevin Pelton here, ESPN.com. What's the downside of this trade for the 76ers with Noel?
Well, that means more playing time for Okafor, and at this point he's not been nearly as effective in terms of helping the Sixers win as Nerlens Noel has been, and that doesn't really matter the last 2 months of this season when the Sixers aren't really going to accomplish anything in particular by winning more games. But as you look ahead to 2017-18, and I think really making the turn from rebuilding to starting to try to win now, that's where it starts to become a concern.
Kevin, once the dust settles from this trade deadline, and of course there's going to be players out there that get released, who are some of the big names that might be signed by another team and then end up having an impact?
Well, certainly the guy in this trade, Andrew Bogut, assuming he gets bought out by the Sixers, is an experienced big man. I don't think he's still the starter caliber player that he was last year with the Warriors. He hasn't been the same guy so far in Dallas and has struggled with injuries. But if you're bringing him in to just provide depth in the front court, then he can help teams. Darren Williams, by all accounts, headed to the Cleveland Cavaliers after getting bought out by Dallas, and he'll be a nice upgrade for them as a backup point guard. Beyond that, a little tough to say right now. There hasn't been, any specific reporting about, there was a lot of Sacramento players that they weren't able to move before the deadline, but it sounds like they might not be going anywhere. The Kings got a nice win to start off the post-DeMarcus Cousins era last night, and it just kind of depends on a case-by-case basis how interested teams are in letting those guys go and how interested players are in maybe giving up some money to go play for a contending team to finish the season.
What do you think of that, where you could just trade Bogut and say, we don't want you? So basically, these guys just end up someplace on contend. It feels cheap, right?
Well, I think that's why, the buyout is a good solution for both the player and the team because, in Philadelphia's case, Bogut isn't someone they're really looking at wanting to play the rest of the season. And obviously, I don't think going to the Sixers would have been his choice. He chose the Mavericks. The Warriors gave him a choice of possible destinations when they were trading him to clear salary space for Kevin Durant. And, he made it pretty clear at that point he wanted to be on a contender.
Kevin Pelton, ESPN.com. So overall, you gave Colangelo a B- for the deal. How do you think he's done with this roadmap that was handed to him by Sam Hinkie?
I think the important thing is he hasn't really deviated from it that much. And I know everyone wants to constantly contrast and compare these two guys and make it out to be that, Hinkie was doing one thing and Colangelo was doing the other. But, so far it hasn't been dramatically different. And I think Colangelo will have more of a chance to put his stamp on things this summer when you've potentially got a pair of lottery picks. You've again got cap space. We'll know more about the direction he's planning to take it. But I just don't think they're that different so far.
All right. Kevin Pelton, of course, ESPN.com, NBA insider. Check out his piece on the grades. He gives Colangelo a B- for the Noel deal. I think a lot of people around here might have given him more of a D, but I agree with you. I understand what they were doing. It just, I guess it's really frustrating for a lot of fans out there who say, all right, you were bad on purpose, and now guys that you started to accumulate through being bad, you're now selling off, one of which is in Dallas. The other one you wish you could sell, but you can't find a suitor for.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, you look at the ultimate good example of that is what they were able to do with Michael Carter-Williams, where obviously he was, one of the early guys as part of this regime, and they traded him pretty quickly, but they got a much more valuable piece for him. And this is not that kind of case, because you're not getting a slam dunk return like you did for Carter-Williams, but you are still ruling over that ability to, have someone on a cheap rookie contract with Justin Anderson and then go out and use that money to sign someone else.
Who'd you like the best? Who did the best on the deadline day?
I thought Toronto had a really strong, not just deadline day, but they got P.J. Tucker really cheap yesterday for a couple second-round picks that are probably going to be late in the draft, and then getting Serge Ibaka for a late first-round pick and Terrence Ross. They've loaded up considerably. I think they're now the second-best team in the Eastern Conference and the most likely team to get back to the Eastern Conference Finals and face Cleveland. The Cavaliers have to be excited about the way everything broke, that Toronto was the only East team that really loaded up heavily to compete with them, and then the ability to get Darren Williams. I also liked what Houston did. Getting Lou Williams was probably the second best player to change teams at the deadline behind DeMarcus Cousins, and they made a couple of smaller trades yesterday that gave them some cap space to go out and compete in the buyout market.
And everybody blasted the Kings. I actually kind of feel bad for them, but I see what they were doing. They never made the playoff. They're getting blasted for trading a guy they never made the playoffs with. I find that to be humorous.
Yeah, they can lose without DeMarcus Cousins as easily as they can win and lose with
right.
him. And I think the big thing is now, they get to turn the page and start operating like a normal franchise again, instead of just constantly trying to chase the 8th seed and figure out which combination of veterans around DeMarcus Cousins can finally be the group that gets them to 40 wins.
All right, Kevin Pelton, ESPN.com. Check it out. All the grades for all of the NBA trades here on the Sports Bash. Thanks, Kevin.
All right, thanks for having me.
You got a pal.